Hello.
Hello,
Hello,
how
Lonnie.
are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm doing good.
So I'm gonna put myself back on mute because I'm outside and they're cutting the grass. So it's I don't know if you hear it. I know my phone.
I'm glad you get to enjoy the beautiful day outside, though.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Do you have a good presentation, Pastor Green?
They say it went well, so it actually airs on Friday. We'll see.
Awesome.
Do we want to go ahead and get started? We got quorum.
I'm counting 6 right now. Pastor Green, if you would like, we can go ahead and get started and then come back to the consent agenda.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Blueprint Council meeting for April. A few housekeeping issues. Our Zoom meetings and chat box are recorded and downloaded, so keep that in mind. Council members should have your videos on and names displayed so you can engage in this conversation. The Blueprint Council meetings are open meetings, so the public is welcome to listen in. There's no public comment period unless we expressly by the executive committee declare that. Conflicts of interest, if there are those, you need to recuse yourself in matters that are a conflict of interest. And probably most importantly, on the opening end, we want to welcome our new direct service provider, Josiah Harrison Benjamin, to the Blueprint Council meeting. All right, welcome, Josiah. You want to say anything?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people already know me here. But for many who don't, Josiah Harrison Benjamin. I am a team lead here at the Damien Center. I'm one of the housing providers here. So I am actually fairly new to Indianapolis. I came during the pandemic in 2021, and that's when I started working at the Damien Center. So I've been here for about 3 years now. So I've worked in housing here in Indianapolis, in Connecticut, where I'm from, and also in the state of Maine. So I have a lot of experience in multiple different systems, doing basically the same job. So really excited to be here today.
Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're glad to have you as a part of our Blueprint Council team. We still don't have enough for consent agenda, or do we? We do, Sierra? Okay, if we
Yes,
do.
we do. Yes.
All right, so if there are no corrections, can we get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from February that were put on boardable? There are no corrections. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, thank you, Megan. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, Anthony. So it's been motioned properly second that we approve our February minutes. All in favor, say aye. Wait, lift up a thumb. Give me something. Great.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Thank you. We've got a busy agenda, so we're going to move right along. Committee business. Turning over to Sierra, upcoming ad hoc committee.
Yes, so we are about ready to gather for the charter committee. The contract has been received. The RFP is in the review process to then be brought to the committee. So if there is anyone who is interested in being a part of this committee, please reach out to me. We're going to be getting started on that hopefully by the end of the month. And the goal is to release the RFP for contractors by the end of May.
Any questions for Sierra? All right, because it's time for us to revisit our charter, so we need to get that done in 2024. So anybody interested, please reach out to her so we can have enough committee members and move forward with that initiative. All right, 2024 COC goal updates and priorities. The statistics guru, Miss Danielle.
All right. As you probably have come to expect, I got a lovely little slideshow to go through to kind of fill you in on where we're at with our community plan goal. Okay, so we are close to probably about halfway through our 18-month goal. Hold on just a second.
I think Dumas, can you mute? I think you're Anthony. I think your mic's on.
There we go. See if that works. Okay, that worked. Okay. I think we're about halfway through our 18-month goal. So want to kind of give some progress on what where we ended up and where we're at and where we're going for this year. So as a reminder, our COC goal is to reduce Black homelessness by 35% by 2025. We don't yet have our point in time count data finalized from this year, but that should be coming soon. But our starting point was essentially the point in time count from 2023 as our starting metric. And then the point in time count for 2025 will be kind of our beginning and end. But in the meantime, we're looking at a lot of data points to see our progress throughout the 18 months. The goal is to reduce the overall Black homelessness by 35%, and also for the 4 subpopulations that are called out in the community plan to end homelessness, which are those experiencing chronic homelessness, families, veterans, and youth and young adults. So there are 3 main tactics that we will provide an update on today as far as what's happening in each of those tactics. And then we'll talk a little bit about the population. So the first key tactic is around creating an equitable coordinate entry process. So we'll have Sarah talk about that. The second one is around implementing a kind of post-COVID housing command center through our Home Now Indy initiative that really coordinates the core functions of our housing system. And then the third tactic is around supportive services, strengthening those, especially housing case management, so folks remain housed and don't return to homelessness. So we have an implementation lead team meeting that meets every 2 weeks, and that essentially has a representative from each of those key tactics and each of the subpopulations. And that group really is kind of overseeing the progress that's happening in smaller work groups. And then there are a bunch of kind of implementation groups that are coming together for specific tasks. So you can kind of see that schedule there. Some things to note that maybe have changed. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but a family by nameless work group has started convening. So that's a big adjustment since our last meeting, which is really exciting. And supportive services work group is coming soon. But that's a little bit about kind of who's in that lead team meeting. So let's kind of kick into each of the tactics. I'm going to kick the first one over to Sarah. Sarah's been leading the coordinate entry refinement to kind of give a little bit of update on where we're at with that.
Well, first of all, something I'd like to mention is that so many folks who are here today in the Blueprint Council have been part of the CES refinement work group, and that is something that I really, really appreciate, to have all of your guidance and expertise as we move through this process. It also makes it a little less intimidating to share our updates, because I feel like you all already, know in large part what is going on. Some of the updates for this most recent Blueprint Council meeting. The new assessment tool is being finalized, and Danielle has worked on building that out in HMIS. Right now, we are conducting some focus groups that are led by folks within the CES refinement groups, focus groups that are kind of directed at the 4 subpopulations to see not whether they think that the various questions that we have arrived upon should or should not be included, but basically what they think about how the questions are being asked and how they think the questions might be better asked, so that we can maybe improve the wording of some of those questions and also get some insight into how we might shape training for the assessors once the new assessment is rolled out. So some of those focus groups are complete. Some of them are ongoing, and we hope to be finished with those by the end of the month. In May, we're going to work on conducting training with all of the CS assessors on the new assessment tool once it's completely finalized, with some of the contributions from the focus groups rolled in. And in June, we'll pilot the new assessment tool and, make sure that it is as, racially equitable in particular as we have, designed it to be. But we really want to make sure that the numbers in the pilot are reflecting the goals that we've laid out for ourselves before we start matching individuals to housing based on that new assessment. So in the meantime, as you know, we've moved away from the VI-SPDAT, and we're using an interim prioritization method that is more racially equitable than the VI-SPDAT, and that has resulted in some improvements. Right now, about 57% of the individuals who are receiving CS assessments overall are Black, and about 65% of CES referrals to permanent housing are Black. And that is, in line with the goal that was set forth by the Blueprint Council to have 65 to 70% of their referrals to PSH be for Black individuals. The housing placements right now are lagging behind the referrals a little bit. And I suspect that that is, maybe in part because of the fact that some of the placements occur after the referrals. And so we're still having some placements that were occurring when we were using like a less racially equitable tool. And I mean, the thought is that as time goes on, the placements are going to begin to match the referrals. I think that there could be some other spots in our process that need to be examined where we could see improvements in racial equity, and that's going to be part of the ongoing CES refinement process. Just to make sure that outside of just the assessment piece, all elements of the whole CES process are racially equitable.
Great. Okay, so we can take questions as we go or at the end, so I'll just keep going. But feel free to like flag anything or come off mute if you have questions along the way. So our second key tactic is around our Home Now Indy mobile team. We don't have a physical hub right now, so we're really operating in kind of this mobile team system right now. So that work group has really created kind of 4 main key objectives that we're working towards. So one is increasing permanent housing placements from family shelters. The second one is improving our connection between veteran providers and non-veteran providers, making sure that those handoffs are happening and people are getting connected to veteran resources. Increasing access to coordinate entry, specifically in places where we know Black households are showing up the most, like family shelters. So that has kind of led to a couple different blitzes, and always focusing on reducing that length of time from referral to house. So somewhat of what Sarah was just saying, our referrals versus housing placements, we are seeing that it is taking longer to house Black households. So our mobile team is really focusing on those open housing referrals and really tuning into what are maybe some of the challenges or barriers that we're facing on getting people housed, and how can we do that a little bit quicker. So there's been a lot of things that have happened with the Home Now mobile team in the last few months. Specifically in March, 2 coordinate entry blitzes occurred at Wheeler Center for Women and Children before winter contingency ended. So we had a lot of different partners that came together to do assessments and to update assessments, to gather documentation, to do some problem solving. So we really focused on youth and young adults, long stayers, people that are 50 and above, since those are the folks that are getting prioritized right now in our interim prioritization, and the winter contingency households. So there were about 100 households altogether that the group interacted with over 2 different weeks. There was definitely some successes with connecting with families. There was some self-resolution that happened. We were also making plans for when winter contingency ended, where those families were going to go. There was one person that was assessed and was referred to PSH the next week, which is absolutely phenomenal and is a great success story, and which really highlights the importance of making sure that we have continual coverage, because that was somebody who maybe could have been housed even sooner if they had been assessed sooner. There was another person who had already been referred to housing, but the housing provider couldn't find them. We didn't know where they were at. Turns out they were at Wheeler, and we were able to connect them and then get them moved in. So definitely that coordination between service providers is really valuable. The Home Now partners through HIP, Ardor, and CHIP, we met several times over the last few months to really talk about our partnership with IHA and to kind of revise the IHA COC MOU that is drafted, that we're hoping will get executed at some time. And we've also planned for some additional capacity under Home Now to support the voucher strategy. Right now we have 30 vouchers a month that IHA is providing to the COC to be filled through coordinate entry. And that's requiring just a lot of like system support to make sure that those pieces are being managed. Our focus in April and beyond, we want to really start talking with Wheeler Shelter for Men and coming up with a plan for assessments at Shelter for Men. It's just there are a lot of people there, and so we have to get a little bit strategic around who, how can we do some data pulling ahead of time to identify the folks we should be prioritizing, because we can't see everybody all at once. So we have some meetings coming up with Wheeler to talk about how we can strategize for that. And then we're also coordinating some mobile team coverage at Horizon House Day Shelter to help with especially chronic documentation. That's actually going to start tomorrow because the Horizon House does a ton of assessments, but they don't always have the time or the case management capacity to do all of the chronic documentation. So looking at okay, so some additional data. I already mentioned the vouchers that we receive. So the Home Now mobile team has been pretty instrumental in kind of monitoring that process and providing support. The way that those vouchers are being utilized right now in our system, Horizon House permanent supportive housing programs have the highest preference for if they have openings in that program is dependent upon vouchers. So they will take kind of the first referrals. And then we're also offering 3 vouchers per month to diversion teams. So that would be the youth and young adult diversion, and then also diversion with families and at HIP. We're also using 5 vouchers a month for our family shelters because there is just not a lot of movement in the family shelters right now. There are not a lot of housing resources that are going towards families. So it's really important that we can use some vouchers because a lot of the families, especially that have a lot of people in their family, that subsidy is like gold to them. So each family shelter is able to identify 1 family per month to nominate, to kind of refer to a voucher. And then the navigation team is assisting when needed to help get them through that process. And then any remaining vouchers that we have are available for rapid rehousing or PSH move on. So folks that are either coming to their end of their rapid rehousing program and still need an ongoing subsidy, or somebody that's been in permanent supportive housing and maybe still needs an ongoing subsidy, but no longer needs that level of supportive services, can transition over to a voucher. So that's kind of how we've been using vouchers right now. We're continuing to refine the process and make it more smooth because our goal is to be able to have a really well-oiled machine that we can then go to IHA and say, okay, now we want even more vouchers. So there are a lot of discussions happening right now to continue to kind of process map the voucher process and figure out where we can make it a little bit more efficient, especially with kind of some of the turmoil over at IHA these days. But so success so far in kind of Q1 of this year, you can see how many referrals we've made. Vouchers are heavily focused for Black households, which is really phenomenal to see. So we've made 11 referrals for diversion, and 64% are for Black households. Family rapid exit, so the shelter has had 8 referrals so far. 87% were for Black households. The move on, so far we've only been using rapid rehousing move on. We haven't had any PSH providers yet identify folks for move on, but we're continuing to work on that process. But 79% of those 29 referrals for rapid rehousing have been for Black households. And then Horizon House PSH, 74% of the referrals they've been taking have been Black households. So seeing some really good data there. So I think vouchers is really going to be a place where, with a lot of opportunity for us, that we really need to continue to get that process going as smoothly as possible so we can ask for more vouchers. When we look at our open housing referrals, so folks that have been referred to an open permanent housing program but have not yet moved in, we have 155 referrals as of the beginning of this month that were kind of in that process to get leased up, but had not been leased up. Our average days from referral or how long it's been since they've been referred is 58 days. When we started pulling this report in November, we were at 108 days as a community. So we have done a lot of work to get that lower and lower, and I continue to see it get lower and lower. And a lot of that is pulling that report, bringing it to case conferencing. Our housing navigation team through Home Now is reaching out to some of those households that have some of those, or the case managers and providers that have those households with longer lengths, to really ask, like, what are the barriers? What can we help with? Do you need some flex funding? Do you need to get connected to the housing acquisition team? Whatever it might be. So definitely seeing some successes in the length of time it's taking to get people housed. But definitely want to continue to see the length of time for Black households to go a little bit lower. And then our third tactic is around supportive services. So we don't have a whole lot here, but I'll kick it back over to Sarah.
Yeah, this is a tactic that I really recently took on. And just to give a little bit of information about where we're at with it right now. This tactic is really focused on increasing housing stability and reducing returns to homelessness. Essentially, how do we ensure that people stay housed? And especially, how do we get housing case management to a standard and ensure that housing case management is driven by housing stability, and ensure that no matter who you're receiving housing case management services from within our community, you are receiving a standard of case management services, and that includes particular ratios. So a goal by the end of this year, we want to, as a community, establish a consensus around our ideal state. This is what it would look like to do housing case management really well in our community, even if that's not what we're doing quite yet. So currently I'm meeting with different housing case management teams to learn more about what housing case management across, various programs even looks like, and also find out from them what they feel like it would take to do their jobs better. And, that's a learning process for me. I think it is a long listening campaign that I hope will culminate in at least one major training opportunity that's focused on best practices and focused on, what it seems to be some of the needs that are particular to our community related to housing case management by the end of 2025.
Great. Okay, so kind of getting through each of the subpopulations kind of quickly, but here's kind of what's happening. So for our families, we have a family shelter work group that just launched the end of May or end of March. That's going to be meeting once a month. Brian Ball from CHIP, Do Project Manager, is really leading that effort to get the family shelter groups back together to really be focusing on the households that are there. They can talk about those voucher referrals, can talk about barriers that they're seeing to housing, and really also talk about the Family Centralized Diversion Fund that HIP is administering through the Day One Families Fund. Carla, I see you have a question.
Yes, ma'am. If I can navigate Zoom, I haven't been on here in a second. Okay, here we go. There we go. Okay. Just really quickly going back to the housing case management piece. Can anyone tell me if CWF is still a thing? Our Centers for Working Families still a thing?
It is still a thing.
I see Chelsea's face. So I'm asking if it's still a thing in the way that it was under LISC. The reason being because with that model, it had the three, sometimes four coaching model that I think would be an awesome housing model in terms of the financial coach, the employment coach, and then you had barrier services, but then you also had education potentially as a fourth leg to that. So, and the reason I'm asking is if that is still a thing, then a universal model can be created and distributed amongst those groups so that whichever catchment area someone tends to fall into, then they can go there, go to any of those CWFs. It was 7 or 8. They can go to those and then receive that same uniform service if possible. But since it's moved to United Way, I'm not sure what the model is now. So if anyone can speak to that, I mean, that just might be an option. I don't know.
Sarah has her hand up.
Yes, I can speak to that. Centers for Working Family does, they do still exist, and it's been expanded to 12 sites. And there are still the coaches like that you described, and there's still training around that coaching. Also, LISC has their Bridges to Opportunity, which they kind of overlay on top of Centers for Working Families, which also uses a coaching model and gets more at employment specific activities. And so they also bring together coaches. So there is a lot around the coaching community locally. So to answer your question, yes, there's a lot around the model of coaching here locally. Historically, there also was a case manager institute where United Way and CHIP and others invested in training for particularly for the homeless intervention community and housing community, but also others and case management training. And we have been hearing from a number of folks some desire to bring that back. And so CHIP and United Way and some others have been talking about how we bring that back and what a renewed curriculum could look like. So there's nothing, we can't say here it is right at this moment, but there has been a lot of conversation around that.
And there's actually a meeting just to kind of keep the conversation going. There is a meeting scheduled tomorrow afternoon with a couple of CHIP team members, myself and Sarah, Lena Hackett with Community Solutions, who was involved in the first iteration of the Indianapolis Case Management Institute, and Sarah and Lydia from United Way, just to really think through kind of what it would look like to bring back a case management institute. It also sounds like there may be some opportunities, as Carlette mentioned, to, you know, have some conversations too around what's out there in terms of coaching, training, and curriculum, because there may be some very interesting ways to integrate some of those models. I think that's some of what's getting unpacked too, of like understanding when we talk about case management versus coaching, like, are there substantive differences in those approaches? I know a lot of organizations are starting to say, like, well, we don't have case managers anymore, but we have coaches. And I imagine, you know, some of the conversations Sarah is, and I don't want to assume, but having is unpacking some of that, right? Like the way we call things and what we call things matters, we think, but we have to unpack that to really define, like, what does housing case management mean and look like? And then what is coaching? Where are there similarities? I think that's all part of this tactic, is to get really crystal clear on those things and then to build on what is already out there.
Now, I know for our agency, and I don't want to speak for any other agency, I know like the shift away from using the word case manager was about power differentials, and like looking at like, you know, calling ourselves like navigators or like coaches is another good one too, where we're trying to show that we're partners in our participants and connecting them to housing resources and stability, and not a person that hovers over them and are like some sort of a dominant power differential.
Great. Okay. Okay, so in the family world, with the Family Centralized Diversion Fund, nearly 40 families since the beginning of February have already been assisted through that. One large family needed a security deposit of over $3,000 just to move into housing. So I think like flex funding is very much something that is a huge need right now. The cost of living and just the amount it's costing for deposits is just so high. But Brian also mentioned, Brian has some background with Center for Working Family Partners as well, and really wants to fold them into this family shelter work group to utilize them for a resource. Also connecting with partners like Bright Lane and Firefly and Ardor to be engaging with our family shelters as well. So I think we'll be seeing a lot more updates from the family subpopulation coming up as Brian gets more into that work. Next subpopulation is veterans. So you can kind of see It's starting to look a little bit better. I pulled some data this morning or yesterday about this, but we're seeing a decrease in veteran homelessness. This is essentially since the last year. We're seeing that top bar is the total number of veterans on our by name list. We are seeing that go down. The blue line are Black veterans on the by name list, and that was staying a little bit stagnant. It is coming down now. I think a lot of that was just some delay in getting the veteran group to start utilizing our interim prioritization, but now that they are, I think we're going to start seeing those numbers come down. So there's definitely a lot of work still being done in the veteran world to be monitoring these numbers and really figure out how do we create some additional strategies and approaches specifically for our COC goal within the veteran system. We were seeing quite a bit of veterans that were at the top of the prioritization pool in the top 2 tiers that we really needed to focus on. So this number is down now. It's not nearly as high as it was. But a lot of veterans are in GPD, which is transitional housing for veterans, and they can stay there for up to 2 years. And so I think it's imperative that we continue to make sure that they do have a permanent housing plan beyond GPD because the veteran system just works very different than the COC at large. So this has been updated. I need to update this since when it went in the packet because we have actually had a meeting today with some of the veteran providers, and it feels like they are using the prioritization more now. There's still some room for improvement there, but I am seeing some progress. And they're using veteran case conferencing to really look at the top of the prioritization list and see who is not getting connected to services yet and getting them connected to housing. And that small work group that's going to start meeting monthly, we just met today for the first time, really to look at a lot of this data, the veteran data, but with that equity lens, because I think in the veteran world, they're still very much just looking at the data as a whole and not necessarily breaking it down by race. And so these are the open housing referrals for veterans. You can see the average is a little bit higher than our whole system, which I think was like 59. It's 83 for the veteran world, but a lot of that again can be because of transitional housing, and those veterans can stay in that programming for up to 2 years. But one thing that really stands out to me is how much longer it's taking us to house Black veterans. So this is something that we will be routinely looking at and pulling on a weekly basis to send those households, those client IDs out to the housing programs to say, what's happening with these Black households? Why is it taking us so much longer to house them? Do we need to get them connected to our housing acquisition team? Do they need flex funding? Like what might it be that's really slowing us down? Yes, the VA is engaged in the meeting. So Trish and Kendall were both there today. I think they are excited to start seeing some of this data on a more regular basis. I think it's just taken a long time to kind of iron out in what spaces we do that. So that's a big focus in the veteran world right now. Okay, youth and young adults. You can kind of see our trends for our youth and young adult by name list. Kind of went up a little bit in the fall and now it's back down. But the disparities are staying kind of the proportion is staying pretty consistent. So a lot of the work that's happening in the youth and young adult world right now, we do have a new Glenmore permanent supportive housing project that's been taking referrals. That's through Partners in Housing, and it's a youth specific project. So move-in should be happening soon. I'm not sure if they've had their first move-in yet, but they have taken, I want to say it's like 12 or 15 households. So that was good to see youth permanent supportive housing because that's not something that we have a lot of in our system. At least 10% of the referrals to vouchers each month are for youth and young adults, either through that move on or through the diversion kind of buckets. So they are definitely taking advantage of vouchers as an additional resource. And the Home Now navigation team has been meeting with the YouthLink navigation team regularly, really focusing on getting documents, getting folks ready in coordinated entry, gathering the documentation, especially for the vouchers, because it's just a lot of extra documentation that you need for the IHA process. Okay, and then the last subpopulation, chronic homelessness. So a lot of the focus on chronic homelessness has really been through our interim prioritization and working the top of the coordinate entry prioritization list. So really looking at those households that are experiencing chronic homelessness, how do we make sure, well, one, that they're getting into court entry, but then once they are in, how are we making sure that we get the documentation that we need? So a lot of this work is really just kind of working the top of the pool, connecting with those households, and continuing to provide support to make sure that they are ready for referral when there is an opening. Our chronic by name list is, it needs to be rebuilt. So it's really tricky to determine someone's chronicity based on HMIS data, because there's just a lot of discrepancies based on all the different places that they interact with in our community. So that's something that we need to focus on, is how do we rebuild our chronic by name list? And then the family by name list, we also have a family by name list, but it has been not loading for us. And we've been working with our vendor to figure out what the timeout issues are with that. So I don't have those trends for chronic or for families, but we are continuing to work on that. And the family by name list is tricky too, because there are several family shelters that don't use HMIS. And so it wouldn't be a very complete picture. So that's something that Brian will be exploring in that smaller family work group, is how do we really get a good picture of what's happening with families. I think one thing that's really exciting to look at would be our permanent supportive housing referrals for Q1 so far of this year. This is something, when we created this goal, I think we were way, Sarah, do you remember what the percentage was for Black households getting referred to PSH? It was like 45, 42. It was terrible. We're up to 60%, which is great. And we still have some ways to go, but the interim prioritization is working. It is much better than what we had before. So just wanted to kind of share that. We've had a lot of movement in permanent supportive housing lately. So that's a great thing. And you can also kind of see the programs of where those folks are going. So Partners in Housing has taken 33 referrals just in this first quarter. Horizon House taking a bunch as well. So I think that that's really something to highlight and to celebrate, that we've had 111 referrals to permanent supportive housing in the first quarter. That's really amazing. So any questions that kind of came up from this, or? And Chelsea, you mentioned St. Lucas Lofts should be coming on soon. Yes, but I do believe that is a youth and young adult program.
There are 10 units, I believe, in St. Lucas Loft dedicated to youth and young adults. And I know outreach, Inglewood's working closely with outreach, and that's going to be a huge resource as well, to see some more movement in the youth system.
Stephanie, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the presentation, and thanks for all of that information. There's a lot of exciting things, hopefully, that are going to come on board soon. I had a question going back to the key tactic ones, specifically about the implementation lead team. Who kind of a question is, who's invited to be on that, and for why are they, who, what, where, and why, kind of on that?
Yeah. So we kind of had a lead for each of the tactics. So I'm kind of the project manager leading the Home Now mobile team. So that's I'm kind of in the meeting for that. Sarah is there representing the project manager that's managing the court entry refinements and the supportive service tactic that's going to get up and going. As far as the subpopulations, Kelsey from Outreach kind of was identified in the youth and young adult world. We're happy to take some other folks too, if anyone else wants to join this meeting. For the veterans, we have Trish, I think Kendall, and kind of nominated Trish to be kind of that lead in the veteran space. For chronic, we have Nikki Watson playing a big piece of that. And then Lindsay has been coming, because Lindsay has been doing a lot with the navigation around that. And then for families, we have Brian, who's leading the project manager at CHIP, that's leading kind of in the family space. So it's really, it can, if there's somebody else who's interested in it, I think the people we've kind of pulled would be people who are either leading some of those smaller implementation work groups, or know the people that are and can have a close connection with them to then be able to kind of report up and kind of see. So we use that space to really strategize together around like what still needs to happen, what doesn't need to happen. What do we need to report up to the Blueprint Council?
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
Yeah. Amani?
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, mine is threefold. First of all, I'm really excited to hear about all of the different things that are actually going on and the numbers increasing in the positive way and decreasing in from the negative aspect of it. That's really exciting to hear. It's also very encouraging to hear for the people that I talk to or that I try to share information with. So thank you for that, Danielle. But also, I really had two questions. I'm not sure whether or not this fits, but I'm just going to kind of drop it here, and if it does, I can get an answer. Great. If not, maybe somebody could let me know later. But for the chronicity and the folks, you mentioned that there was someone who you couldn't find, and it turned out that they were like at Wheeler, and then the work that's being done there. But what specifically, if anything, is being done for those who actually have fallen through the cracks or continue to fall through the cracks, so that we can stem that flow of people and they are not just lost? Because to my understanding, when those types of things happen, it's not as if we kind of go back and say, oh, this happened, this shouldn't have happened, let's correct this like now. But it seems that those people are either left where they are, or they're just kind of forgotten altogether. And I want to make sure that we address that. And then also in terms of case management, and I think I've asked this question a number of times, but specifically, what accountability are we actually putting out there to hold agencies accountable in terms of case management, so that it isn't that you complete the assessment and we have success there, but there is no true case management whereby people are being automatically purged from lists when they haven't been housed, and there has been no communication with that person to know what their status is. Are they housed? Are they still seeking housing? Like, what actually happened to that person? Those people, to me, seem to also just kind of fall off the list. And then if they decide that they're going to go through the process of going through the steps all over again and going through being reassessed all over again, that's like them continuously starting over. So it's like constantly being re-traumatized. And how are we addressing that? And I don't think we are at all. But if we are, I'd like to know how. And if we're not, I'd like to know what we plan on doing about those things. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say for I think some of these both of those questions are kind of related in a sense. So I think as far as like people who like had been referred or we can't find them, or even the people that are at the top of the list, that's a lot of what the navigation team is focusing on, is really looking at who's at the top of the pool and making sure that we can maintain contact with them, know where they're at, know who they're connected with, so that when they do get called for housing, we already know where they're at and we have all their documentation ready to go, which can be tricky. A lot of this comes to communication, because somebody, like I said, could have been at Wheeler. And I think we try to have like Wheeler at case conferencing as much as possible, so that when they know somebody's going to get referred, like they can make that connection. But it's just really tricky when there's a lot of people. So a lot of it comes down to communication. One of the things that I think we really need to continue to focus on is that the Home Now mobile team of really expanding our communication out to the community of where that mobile team is going to be and when, so that that information can get shared. So for instance, with going to Horizon House a couple of times a month, the plan was really to look at like the top 40 people that are in coordinated entry that still need chronic documentation, and to be able to spread that word for like a week or two out in the whole community using case conferencing and notifications in HMIS to say the mobile team is going to be at Horizon House on this day, and we would love to see you there, so that we can be there to give you that support to get you through that process, as one way, because we know there are a lot of people that are going to Horizon House on a regular basis. But that's tricky, because then what if nobody sees that person in those 2 weeks? So a lot of this is communication and knowing how do we can keep in contact with folks. That's a big piece of it.
I apologize, but whose responsibility is that? Where I guess the basis of my question is, where is the accountability? Because we could say what we should do, right? And I agree with everything that you said, but Should and must are two totally different things. So what I'm saying is, I think there needs to be a must in there, and that there should be several things that people should not automatically be purged from any list unless we've truly done our due diligence and we have really sought to find that person or those persons to make sure that they are not spending unnecessarily lengthy times waiting for something that, or being skipped over for something, that's actually, there, that they've actually gone through the process, they've waited, they've done everything they were supposed to do. And then because of a technicality, it could be that perhaps the person, their phone was stolen, or, they have a different number, or, whatever it may be, but really stressing the fact, or the person could have called in and said, hey, this is my situation, I've spoken to a case manager, this is my situation. And that responsibility of that case manager is to make sure that that's documented, so that you can say, well, yes, I've had contact with that person within the past 30 days, or, whatever it may be. And I don't see that happening. I don't see it happening. And that's what I want to make sure that we don't leave out. So as we work and we move forward to make sure that we're collecting the data, we're using it to create new systems and to tweak things, I want to make sure that as we go along that path, that we're not leaving out the little details, because sometimes it's the small details that make the biggest difference. And I think that's a really important thing to note.
Yeah. Yeah. So Chelsea kind of put in the chat, like really a question around like the role of assessors in doing follow-up after an assessment. And I don't think that there is a piece of accountability to that. I mean, there is kind of an auto exit process where if somebody doesn't have a contact and it's not logged in HMIS for 90 days, they will go inactive and fall off the list. And we see about 75% of the people that get assessed every year go inactive. Some of them come back, some don't. Most of them don't come back. But how do we keep track of the ones that do? And I think that's the thing that needs to get solved for, because there isn't necessarily that. There isn't right now any kind of accountability for following up with an assessment, because we've intentionally made our system one where it's a no wrong door approach. You can all come, but then in doing that, nobody then is ultimately responsible, because you don't have a caseload necessarily. We all pitch in to help, but then in essence, sometimes nobody helps out.
And so that was my question. So is it the responsibility then of the assessor, or is it responsibility of the case manager? Because if the assessor is just they're the port of entry, so they're collecting they're asking all the questions, they're getting all the information, and then that person is then assigned to a case. And if they're not, I'm suggesting that perhaps they should be then assigned to a case manager, so that someone is responsible for that person, or those persons, or however we want to say it. But there must be a greater level of responsibility and accountability, in that whole process. Because if we already know that people are falling off the list because they're being automatically purged, and we know that creates an issue, then why aren't we addressing it? We should never say that we know a thing is, but then we don't have a solution for it. If we can find a solution, a realistically viable solution, we should be making sure that we do that.
Yeah, right now there is not a case manager that gets assigned to somebody after they get assessed, and I think it comes down to capacity. We were really focusing on who's at the top of the list, because there is not capacity in our system right now to assign a case manager to everyone that's assessed. We do have data on specific assessors and like the result of those referrals, what percentage actually get housed, or which ones get referred and which ones go inactive. So we do absolutely have that. It's part of our coordinate entry monitoring process that happens on a monthly basis, that Matt is connecting with assessors and site administrators on that. So I mean, I really feel like this is something that needs to continue to get elevated to our coordinate entry leadership team, that needs to probably get convened, and there needs to be a governing body of our coordinate entry system. We have a group, but they haven't met for a while. So I think that monitoring process needs to get lifted up to them.
I definitely agree with I was just reading Chelsea's comment about coordinated entry assessors. And as a coordinated entry assessor, I think one of my biggest barriers is trying to keep people connected. And I try, do my due diligence and work with my participants to have them do follow up with me. But at the same time, sometimes what happens is that they fall off for a lot of various reasons. They lost their cell phone, or they move on to a different place, and I don't get connected. And I wonder if that happens a lot in our system.
It does, and that's one of the reasons that I try to continue to lift it up. I try to make sure that I'm continuing to challenge that, because it is really not a back burner issue. It is a key piece to all of the other pieces of this puzzle that we are, so carefully, piecing together, so that we get a sense of what the broader picture of it actually is. And we could speak in numbers all day, and certainly numbers don't lie, but it's people. For me, it's the numbers, and I understand the numbers, but it's the people, it's the stories, it's the connections, and it's personal. So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that as we're looking at things, that we don't overlook the obvious, because to me that's an obvious factor. That's something that we should be looking at. And Josiah, I appreciate the work that you do and how personal you take it, but not everyone that is sitting in those roles assessing uh, may do it to the same level. And certainly there should be a standard. So that I guess that's the bottom line then. There's accountability, and there's a standard, and there's a must. And so those are things that I want us to keep at the forefront of our mind and our thinking as we push forward. And we try to make sure that we are removing barriers, and we are not creating barriers where there need not be barriers, because sometimes it's easy to do that. So that's it, though. Thank you.
No, I totally agree with you wholeheartedly. And I'm just like, yes, Amani, you're like saying the things I want to say. But like, because I worked in a community, in the last community I worked in, I felt like assessors definitely had a standard. Like there was a standard in place of like, this is what you need to do as an assessor. This is how often you need to check in on these clients. This is how you need to connect them to these resources. And I think what's missing in this community is just having that standard. So that all assessors who are assessors can operate the same way and keep those folks connected. So thank you for bringing that stuff up and elevating, and always elevating that, because I think it's really important.
Danielle, you done? All right. Next on the agenda, we'll hopefully that coordinated entry leadership group will be meeting, so that'll get sorted out there. Next on our agenda is the housing competition update. Miss Alicia, she's joined us today. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Pastor Green. Okay, let me see if I've got this here. Let's see. It's been a while since I've shared something on Zoom. All right, let's try this. All right, are you all looking at a colorful screen? All right, perfect. Okay, hi, my name is Alicia Vaughn, and I'm with City Consultants and Research. Since 2017, the City of Indianapolis has hired me to help with the writing of the Continuum of Care application each year. I'm going to begin with a reminder of the timeline and highlights from last year's competition. Each year, it's approximately 90 days in which we have, as a community, to complete a local competition and write the application for the national competition for COC funding. There are approximately 4 different parts of the application: the main application, the appendices to that main application, a priority listing in all of the different individual project applications. In 2023, we had 32 project applications included in our submission, including the planning grant and the YHDP projects, or the youth homeless demonstration projects, which were not ranked and included in the priority listing. I'm gonna move my chat. I'm gonna take a pause here so I can see chat. Okay. And then how many projects are funded each year depends on our COC score for the main application and its attachments. So we are scored on that main application and the attachments, and then based on that, on how well we do is how much money we get. So here are the results. We scored as a community on a 200-point scale. So that score of 170.5 is out of 200 points. We were well above the median score of 151.5 and just 15 points shy of the high score. The score is about normally what we get each year. As you can see, we've hovered around between 160 and 170 points each year since 2017. There are two exceptions. You'll notice here, the first one is in 2020, there was no competition, so I didn't even include that on the chart, so I've skipped a year. And then in 2021, the total possible points was only 173 points, not 200 points. So you'll see a dip with 2021, but the score that we had of 137 was actually competitive out of the total possible points. Okay. This next slide shows our award growth over time. These awards are not when they were given, it's based on the competition year. So to give an example, I have a 2023 awards. That was our 2023 competition. They'll actually spend them in 2024. In 2020, there was no competition. So you'll see the award only increased with its annual fair market rate increases, and there's not a whole bunch of colors to show all the different types of grants. Our biggest jump is in 2021 when the YHDP, noted in purple, and those purple sections, becomes part of the annual renewal or the annual competition. We knew at some point those projects will be part of the national competition and will have to be ranked in our priority listing, but we do not know when that will be. HUD will state that out in the NOFO of when our YHDP projects become subject to the national competition. So what were the overall results of the 2023 awards? The next few slides I'm going to go through are the listing of the different projects awarded from this 2023 competition. I've included the amounts awarded, the project type, the number of units. This first slide is our renewal projects, and it's a total of $8,056,771 for 584 units of assistance. A total of 29 units were part of a reallocated projects where we take funding from a renewal project that's low performing and move it to a new project that's higher performing. And so that's included in this total number of 130 units of new projects. So this is a combination of reallocated funding and new funding coming into our system on these different projects. New funding in total was $925,970, with $418,000 roughly being DV bonus funding for the Damien Center, and then $507,000 going to Adult and Child Hannah Commons Project and the Partners in Housing Illinois Place project. This last slide is our YHDP projects. They were automatically renewed this year and were not subject to the priority listing. I think I've mentioned that a few hundred times here. And as I've mentioned, I've mentioned it, and earlier in the presentation, at some point, these projects will be part of the national competition, but the NOFO document that HUD releases each year to tell us how to apply will let us know when and how that will occur to include those. Nevertheless, with the YHDP, I'm going to go back one slide. We are ready. We have a scoring tool that is a version of the current scoring tool used for all the other providers. We've included provider input from the YHDP providers. So those projects are aware if they are scored this year and how they will be scored. So they're ready to go in case YHDP does become part of that priority listing. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, all these projects via the priority listing are funded if we as a COC score well on our main application and the appendices that go with that application. So our score in 2023 was 170.5, and this slide breaks down the score from HUD, the one column being the maximum score and then our score. Overall, we did well, but I want to point out a few areas where we didn't quite score all the points. Some of these are minor and easy to fix, and some are a little bit bigger than that. So I do want to note every point counts, and not every point is easy to get, meaning not every point is equal when we're writing this. So on the monitor side, under coordination with federal, state, local, and other private organizations, we missed 2 points. So right here, we missed 2 points. This is an area where greater outreach to more stakeholders is needed. We had a lot of staff turnover between CHIP and DMD. So this is where the points are much easier to get, increasing our outreach. On the not so minor side, we have system performance measures down here 2C. And this is the largest area where we lose points, and the points vary from year to year. These points measure the performance of the entire COC, so we don't necessarily have a carrot for every provider to do well, other than serving our community well and serving our neighbors well. So we don't really have anything to hold over providers that aren't getting COC or ESG funding to do better with their data or their system performance measures. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into these. These are the system performance measures. This is what we are measured every year. The first 3 are from the PIT count each year, so we'll be scored on our numbers from January of 2024. The rest of the system performance measures are reported in the first quarter of the calendar year, but are from the federal fiscal year. So we'll be scored this year on system performance measures that took place between 10/1/2022 through 9/30/2023 against the fiscal year prior to that. Danielle, correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I think I got those dates right. So any changes we make now in this current fiscal year before 9/30/2024 will help us in next year's competition 2025. So what I'm trying to say, and not very eloquently, is there's a delay in being able to make a change in the system performance measures. When we know how well we are doing in the first part of the calendar year, most of the current year's data is almost done. We're almost halfway through the fiscal year by the time we know how well we've done the previous fiscal year. So, okay, I want to touch on another reason some of the system performance measures are difficult. The points change from year to year. What I mean is the total worth of the system performance measures varies from year to year, as well as the data portion. So data is worth a portion of the points, and the narrative writing is worth a portion of the points. So you can see over time, data points have increased, and our ability as a COC to explain our strategy and our written or write a narrative is worth less of the total. And I kept off 2020 here because there was no competition. And I kept off 2021 because it's an anomaly. The system performance measures were worth a lot less, and there was a lot more narrative. And HUD is moving back to how they had collected information previously where data was worth more than the narrative. So with data being a greater portion of our system performance measures, meaning that the numbers are just cooked before we even start writing the application, it's more important to get both COC funded and non-COC funded projects to enter data correctly and perform well, placing households in permanent housing, preventing returns to homelessness, and reducing the length of time a household experiences homelessness. And so my last slide, as our time comes for our next competition, DMD and CHIP staff, we're all been working on a rough timeline of when to expect things. This, of course, will be revised once the NOFO drops. I've based these dates largely on a pattern of behavior from 2017 until now, with the pandemic era being a little bit different. We can do a little preparation while we're waiting for the NOFO, such as releasing letters of intent, which we're hoping to do next month. We're also hosting 2 half-day trainings on various topics for frontline staff. And then we're also working on finalizing scores for renewal projects and addressing any corrective actions that projects may need to take for not meeting draw goals or meeting minimum performance threshold. So that's some of the prep work that we're working on right now before we expect a NOFO to drop on or about July. So I'll move it to any questions and answers. I'm actually going to stop my share so that you're just not looking at PowerPoint.
I'll make a comment as we talk about system performance measures, and I think we're going to hear in a few minutes a little more about the housing hub and things like that. Is, some of the key performance measures we get measured on as an entire community are, length of time people are experiencing homelessness, exits to permanent housing. And so every time we add a component to our system, we have to look at how that's going to impact the overall system. So, as we think about and talk about, for example, adding shelter beds, if there is not a clear housing strategy aligned to that, that can impact our system performance measures, particularly around length of time and exits to housing. And so those are things I think we have to be really cognizant about and intentional about, because even if they are not COC funded or federally funded at all, it still counts and gets pulled into our system performance. So for example, what's happening at Wheeler does not get any federal dollars, but they impact our overall system performance. We saw that with Blue Triangle too, particularly in terms of lengths of time. So I think all of this is to say it's really important for this group to understand how any changes in our community can impact our system performance measures. And those measures are largely based on, again, housing measures, right? So how long does it take somebody to exit homelessness into a permanent housing destination? So I wanted to flag that, because I don't think there's always been that shared understanding that this isn't just the agencies being funded through COC resources.
So I know we don't have the time to go into it today, but CHIP so we submitted the system performance measures last month, and we have, I don't even know what month it was. It might have been January or February. I don't know, sometime this year. We've submitted it. But we've done an analysis essentially of each of those measures and kind of the organizations or agencies that are impacting it one way or the other, kind of the best and the not so best list. I think that could be a really good future meeting, maybe in the next meeting, if there's time on the agenda, for us to really dive into some of them so that you can see what that looks like. And then there are some comparisons to like other COCs our size, so you can kind of see our performance compared to others. There's a really great dashboard that you can compare any COC either nationwide or to other COCs the same size. That's really helpful. So if that's something this group's interested in, we're more than happy to do that at our next meeting.
Yeah,
Thanks,
no,
Nick.
I think that would be super helpful. We could talk about that.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, Alicia. Next on the agenda for the time is Andrew, Housing Hub updates. What's changed lately?
Hi, Pastor. How are you? How is everybody today? Andrew Merkley. I'm the administrator for the Division of Homelessness and Eviction Prevention here at the Office of Public Health and Safety. The Housing Hub has been scaled back some from when I previously came to speak with everyone. We are looking at a total number of occupants in the shelter part of the facility at 150, and that's down from 250. We've reduced the size of the cafeteria and the kitchen, and that's in response to what we heard from service providers and about the needs. But we've also at the same time expanded the space for the day services and housing navigation centers. So really trying to focus on the needs of the population and making sure that we're focused on getting them housed as opposed to just sheltering them at the facility. That's really the goal. We are working with the state on responding to the RFP that they plan to put out in May. And we expect to receive all $20 million of that funding for this facility. And I think what's important for this group to understand is that that funding is going to be tied directly to, you know, the cost per square foot, as well as the number of beds in the facility. And the state is looking at this facility as a shelter, first and foremost, based on the task force report that came out, and it specifically referenced a shelter. And that's coming directly from IHCDA. We are continuing to work on the renderings, the design of the facility, but that largely has not changed aside from the sizes of the different components. We did select a contractor, and that is Shield Sexton. That's kind of where we're at.
Anybody got questions? Do we know how long it's going to take the state to respond? And once they release this RFP, they have a timeline?
Yeah, so they'll release the RFP. We'll have about 2 weeks to respond to it. We've already been drafting our response, and then they would like to make the decision fairly quickly after that. So I'd say within a month of releasing the RFP, we'll have an answer.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Go ahead, Chelsea.
And this, whether or not this is a conversation for today, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but as we think about the shelter, again, tying it to a housing strategy, I think becomes critical, because like, what's the exit destination or pathway for folks? And so is the master leasing part of that housing strategy then, or kind of how do those fit together?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we've been talking about it internally is those two components are part of the overall strategy for solving for homelessness. I think some of the same people who, you guys know better than me, but I would assume some of the same people who are living unsheltered, who can't go into our existing shelter system, may be able to access the new shelter, and they would also be able to access those master lease units.
And I'm going to put in the chat, I don't know if everyone's aware on this call of our open RFI out right now. So a request for information for both landlords and service providers for our master leasing program. So I'm going to just drop a link in the chat if you know of anyone who's interested. We are just seeking information at this time. So it's a little bit different than a request for proposals. We're just seeing what the interest in the community is right now to participate in a master leasing program. But this is going to close at the end of the month. So if you do know of anyone who's interested, please, we would love to see submissions back to this request. And if you have any questions, Rodney or I can answer those.
Talking about this mass releasing, how are we doing on St. George? We got people in there now?
Yes, 3 people moved in this week.
3, okay. All right, thanks, Andrew. We don't have any additional business, so Sierra, you're up. I see.
Yes, so the convening for the second quarter is going to be May 30th from 8 to 11 at United Way. I'll be sending out a link for registration by the end of this month. And then for knowledge references, the third quarter convening is going to be September 25th, and then for quarter 4, December 10th. And then in regards to the training that Alicia briefly mentioned, these are more so focused on providing for the frontline staff. So these trainings are going to take place on May 15th and 16th from 8 to 2. I have sent out save the dates for the providers within these groups. We'll be sending out registration links by the end of the week.
All right. Any other questions or comments? We had a full agenda. Don't forget if you can help out with the charter revision, hit Sierra up for that, so we can keep that moving for 2024. Anything else? We haven't missed anything. Getting ready to give you 10 minutes back. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your day. I gave you a few minutes back on behalf of Jeff Bennett. All right. Y'all take care.
Well, you're the best president we've ever had, Pastor Green.
Y'all take care.
Hey, thanks. Goodbye, everybody.